To understand the stocks that are traded on the stock market, you need to understand the corporations that issue them. But many people don't. They think that corporations are living things, almost like people. Some people think that corporations are evil things that don't pay enough taxes. And some people think that corporations are wonderful things that provide jobs and products for us to use. I don't like either of those conceptions. In this course, we're going to think of corporations in a much different way. We're going to think of corporations like Bank of America and Ford Motor Company as just a collection of goodies. Some of these goodies are tangible, or things that we can kick, like trucks or corn or an inventory of wood that will eventually be turned into furniture. Some of the goodies are intangible, like a strong brand name. People are willing to pay more for a Ferrari, and not just because it's a beautiful, sophisticated car. They pay more because it's a Ferrari. The brand name is worth something. You can't kick it, but it's valuable. A pharmaceutical company like Merck has patents on hundreds of new vaccines and medications that are in various stages of development. None of them is producing a dime now, and most will prove to be totally worthless. A few, though, will be blockbusters that improve the lives of millions of people throughout the world. Those patents will be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet all they are a few legal documents. Patents, like the brand name Ferrari, are intangible property. I like to think of a company as just a pile of these goodies. Economists don't call them goodies, of course. They call them assets. We'll use both terms. So, who gets the goodies? Who gets the assets? We need a way to allocate the goodies, don't we? We need a sharing rule. Along with bonds, stocks comprise the sharing rule for the goodies. Who gets what? Let me explain. Let's suppose that you start a lawn care business. We'll call it multi-mower. You invest $10,000 of your own money, and you borrow $10,000 from your friend Lisa at 5% interest. You use this $20,000 to buy a good lawnmower and a used truck to get it from one job to another. Your goodie bag is the mower and the truck. After a year of hard work, you've taken in $150,000, but that's not all profit. Suppose you paid $100,000 for fuel, maintenance, and labor. $150,000 in revenues minus $100,000 in expenses leaves $50,000. You're left with $50,000, and you still have the now used mower and the truck. That's the bag of goodies. Who gets those goodies? Some people might think that you and Lisa should each get half of that, or $25,000 and half of the equipment, because you each contributed the same amount, $10,000. You could use a 50-50 sharing rule like that, but that's not the way you and Lisa set things up when you founded Multimower. Yes, you both contributed your money, but you invested $20,000 in the business. Lisa didn't. Lisa loaned you money, which you then invested in the business. You owe Lisa, the lender, her $10,000 plus interest. At the agreed 5%, that's another $500 for a total of $10,500. After you repay Lisa her $10,500 out of the bag of goodies, you have $39,500 of your $50,000 left. You also have the used lawnmower and a used truck. The sharing rule that you and Lisa agreed to use in advance is that Lisa would get the first $10,500 and nothing more. You get nothing until Lisa is paid in full, and then you get everything that's left over. You're the residual claim holder. Economists would say that Lisa is the lender while you are an owner. Another way to say it is that Lisa is a bondholder while you are a stockholder. Now, lender Lisa might not be happy with this outcome. After all, you both put $10,000 on the table, but Lisa got a lot less than you did. Her net is only $500 in interest. You got everything else, which is $39,500, a used lawnmower, and a used truck. But that was the deal. Lisa gets the first $10,500, which includes her $10,000 loan, and you get the rest. You own Multimower, not Lisa. Lisa the lender's money was a lot safer than yours, though. Suppose that the year's revenues had only been $100,000 instead of $150,000. After deducting the $100,000 in fuel, maintenance, and labor as before, you're left with a big fat zero. The good news is that you still have the now-used truck and the mower. But that's all that's in the bag of goodies in this case, and Lisa gets the first $10,500. You, the owner, have to come up with that before you get a dime. Unless you can raise outside money somehow, you're going to have to sell the mower and the truck. You probably won't get the $20,000 that you paid for them, though, because they're a year older now. Say you get $15,000. That lets you pay off Lisa's $10,000 loan and the $500 in interest, leaving you with just $4,500. You've lost $5,500 of your $10,000 investment. Lisa's glad she was a lender and not an owner in this case. What happens if you decide not to pay Lisa? That's a bad idea because Lisa has the law on her side. She can make you sell items from the bag of goodies until you've raised enough money to repay her. She can force you into bankruptcy if you won't produce her money. If it turns out that the lawnmower and truck only bring $9,000, then Lisa gets it all. She's out $1,000 of the $10,000 she loaned you and doesn't get her $500 in interest either. That's bad, but it's way better than what you get as the owner. You get nothing. Every penny of your original $10,000 investment is gone. When things go well, it's usually better to be the owner. When things go badly, it's usually better to be the lender. I've simplified the world of sharing rules in our example by only having two kinds of financial claims, loans and residual claims or ownership. That ownership claim is what's called common stock. There's another kind of stock called preferred stock, which is in between common stock and loans. Preferred stock gets paid after the loans and before the common shareholders. We won't spend too much time on preferred stock because it's a much smaller proportion of the market. Loans come in different flavors too. For example, if you pledge specific property, like your house, to secure a loan, then it's called a mortgage. The amount you borrow is secured by the collateral, which is your house. If you don't repay the mortgage loan, then the lender can foreclose and take your house as compensation. Unsecured debt doesn't have specific collateral backing it. For example, if you default on both your mortgage and your credit card debt, then the credit card company can't seize your house. That goes to the mortgage lender. It might not make much of a difference to you. You lose your house regardless, but it means a lot to the mortgage lender and the credit card company. One of them gets your house, and the other gets nothing. A bond is a loan with a specific maturity date, the date when the amount borrowed must be repaid. You might hear that a corporation or a government issued 20-year bonds, for example. Those bonds will pay interest along the way, but the principal, the amount loaned, isn't due for 20 years. Bonds are usually tradable, too. If I buy a brand new 20-year bond from ExxonMobil Corporation and decide that I want to sell it to you a year later, then I can do that. You pay me, and ExxonMobil just changes its records so that the name of the owner on the bond is you instead of me. From our perspective, we don't need to worry about those categories of debt. For the most part, I'll use bond and debt interchangeably. The important thing to remember is that lenders get paid first. Stockholders, the owners, get paid last. As a company does business over time, the goodies in the bag that we call the corporation produce things, be they cars or cornflakes or mowed lawns. Sometimes the goodies make money doing that, and sometimes they lose money doing that. As this happens, the pile of goodies gets bigger or smaller, depending mostly on whether the company earned a profit or took a loss. But the sharing rule doesn't change. The bondholders get paid first, and the stockholders get paid last. A company might lose a lot of money, which shrinks the bag of goodies that back the loan, or it might earn a lot of money, which grows the bag of goodies. Unless the company borrows more money, though, the lenders don't get a bigger pile of goodies. They get the same fixed payout. All of the new goodies go to the owners. That can change the risk that lenders face. Let's suppose that instead of lending money for 1 year, lender Lisa had bought a 5-year bond from Multimower. The terms of the bond stipulate that Lisa will receive 5% annually on her $10,000, and she'll receive her principal back when the bond matures in 5 years. What happens to Lisa if the company does really well over the first 4 years of the loan? Suppose that the company made a total profit of $100,000 over those 4 years, and business looks so good that it uses the money to buy more lawnmowers and more trucks to cash in on the opportunities. This company is a lot bigger than it was when it started out with just a lawnmower and a used truck worth a total of $20,000. But it still only owes $10,000. If year 5 turns out to be a bad one and the company doesn't earn anything at all, then Lisa is still going to get paid. The company has equipment that was worth $100,000 just a year ago. The odds are good it's worth way more than the $10,500 that it needs to pay Lisa's 5th year of interest and repay the loan principal. Over time, a company's debt ratio, or its total debt in proportion to its total assets, can change a lot. For example, Philip Morris had a debt-to-asset ratio of 10.7% in 2006. About $1.10 that the company had came from borrowings. By 2009, that had grown to 44.6%. The point is that the risk of a company's debt can change over time. This can happen for several reasons, but the most common one is that the company made a lot of money so that the pile of assets backing the bonds is big. Of course, it works the other way too. If a company loses money, then the assets shrink, and the odds of the company being able to repay the loan also shrink. That can lead a rating agency to downgrade the company's securities. Sometimes firms want to raise money from new investors. Cyclacel, a pharmaceutical company, announced a stock issue in 2013. It said that it was planning to offer more than 6 million new shares to the public at $3 each. The headline of a story that ran on May 16th read, "Cyclacel announces new stock issue." The story continued. Cyclacel is getting in gear to expand its capital base. The company is floating a new issue of common stock in an underwritten public offering. Just under 6.67 million shares of the firm will be sold at a price of $3 apiece. What's going on here? It's pretty simple, actually. If the people running a corporation want to raise extra funds, then they can have the firm issue new securities. Suppose that your good friend Carl wants to get into the lawn care business with you. You like the idea and agree to sell him 20% of the business for $50,000. Multimower issues new shares to Carl. Now the pile of goodies has an extra $50,000 in it. Some people might think that this is unambiguously great because the company you own is bigger and has more cash. The problem is that you don't own the entire company anymore. You only own part of it. The pile of assets is bigger, but the specific sharing rule has changed. Lisa, the lender, still gets paid first, and the owners still get paid last, but now there's an extra seat at the table. After Lisa gets paid, you have to share part of what's left with Carl, because he's also a common shareholder. Of course, the public companies that we deal with daily, like Microsoft and Starbucks, sell millions of shares worth hundreds of millions of dollars or more at a time. Multimower isn't like that. The stock that you and Carl hold is called private equity. You and co-investor Carl negotiated privately, and the general public wasn't invited. But the idea is the same. The newly issued stock represents the ownership claim on the company. When co-investor Carl buys 20% of your company for $50,000, then the two of you effectively set a value on the entire firm. If 20% of the company is worth $50,000, then the entire firm must be worth $250,000 after Carl invests his $50,000. Simple arithmetic. The bag of goodies that represents the firm must have more than just those lawnmowers and trucks that were worth about $100,000 a year ago. What might we be missing? You've probably guessed it. Multimower has something that we can't kick. It has intangible assets. After 5 years, Multimower has a nice roster of steady customers. Steady customers are worth more than infrequent, spotty customers. Let's make it concrete. How much is one good lawnmower worth? For the sake of argument, let's say we agree it's worth $3,000. Now let's add those steady customers. How much is this lawnmower and a list of people who will pay you good money to mow their lawns worth? My guess is that the mower and the steady customers are worth quite a bit more than $3,000. That's part of the reason Multimower is worth more than just the tangible assets in the goodie bag. Multimower has another important intangible asset. After 5 years, Multimower has earned a reputation for good service at a fair price. When people move to the area and ask their neighbors who mows their lawns, they say, Multimower. Multimower is getting the best advertising in the world for free. Let's change the story just a bit. Let's say that Multimower doesn't want to raise extra funds and won't be issuing new shares anytime soon. But co-investor Carl still wants to get into the lawn care business. Can you make this work? The answer is yes. Instead of Multimower issuing new shares, you can sell Carl some of the shares you already own. In this case, Multimower doesn't receive any new funds at all. Instead, Carl gives you $50,000 and you give Carl a quarter of the company. Yes, I said a quarter of the company, not 20% of the company. Why a quarter? The reason is that Carl's money is going to you personally in this case, and you are giving Carl some of your existing shares. Multimower isn't issuing new shares and doesn't have access to the money you got from Carl. Multimower isn't getting a cash infusion, and it isn't any bigger than it was before you sold your old shares to Carl. You don't have to sell part of the company to raise some cash from it. You own the assets of Multimower, and you can choose to write yourself a check if you like. If Multimower has $1,000 more in cash than it needs for day-to-day operations, and if it doesn't have any major purchases on the horizon, then it probably makes sense for you to use that $1,000 somewhere else. A payment from the company to the shareholders is called a dividend. If you had sold a quarter of Multimower to Carl, 250 shares, so that there's 1,000 shares of Multimower in total, then we'd say that Multimower had paid a dividend of $1 per share. Carl would get $250, and you would get $750. Not all companies pay dividends. Usually it's for one of two reasons. First, some companies don't earn enough to cover their cash needs. This is most common for companies that are growing rapidly. They need all of their cash to buy the things that they need to expand, so there's none left over for dividends. Fred Smith founded Federal Express Corporation in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1971. FedEx did rather well over the years, but didn't pay its first dividend until 2002. If you're adding expensive new air freight jets every year, then you aren't going to have any cash left for dividends. Another reason that companies don't pay dividends is that they've fallen on hard times. For example, Delta Airlines stopped paying a dividend in 2003 and didn't reinstitute it until 2013. In fact, most major airlines weren't paying dividends at the time. Professor Severin Borenstein of the University of California, Berkeley, says that domestic passenger airlines lost $10 billion from 1979 to 1989. In the 1990s, they made about $5 billion in profit, and then they lost $54 billion from 2000 to 2009. Airlines just didn't have the cash to give to shareholders. Don't confuse a cash dividend paid to stockholders with a stock dividend. On March 27, 2013, Core Wafer Industries announced that it was giving its existing shareholders 1 extra share for every 20 shares they currently held. That makes sound like a good deal, but you have to remember the old pizza joke. A foolish person, usually an economist, orders a pizza. The server asks him if he wants it cut into 6 pieces or 8 pieces. "Make it 8, says the economist. "I'm really hungry." A stock dividend does the same thing. It doesn't change the size or value of the company. Instead of owning 20 shares worth, say, $21 each, you own 21 shares worth $20 each. If the exchange ratio is big enough, say 2 for 1, then it's called a stock split rather than a stock dividend. The idea is the same. You own more pieces of the firm, but they're smaller. Ownership offers more than just a residual claim on assets. Ownership conveys control. As long as the stockholders meet the terms of the debt contracts, they decide what to do. For example, suppose that Lisa didn't want you to let Carl buy a quarter of your shares. That's just too bad for Lisa the lender. She's a bondholder, not a stockholder, so she doesn't get to decide things like that. The same goes for personnel decisions. If Lisa wants you to hire her buddy Chris, the most she can do is give you her opinion. As a stockholder, it's your call. Notice that being a part owner reduces your decision-making power, but you can keep control so long as you can't be outvoted. Remember Carl? He owns a quarter of the company. You own 3/4. This means that you can outvote him every time. Even though he's an owner, in this case, he doesn't have any more authority to make decisions than a creditor like Lisa. You have the controlling interest in Multimower. But if Carl acquired 51% of Multimower, then he would call the shots, not you. I hope you agree that it helps to think of a corporation as a bag of goodies and stocks and bonds as the sharing rule that says who gets those goodies. Legally, of course, it's not that simple. Legally, corporations are entities created by or under the authority of law with rights and responsibilities that are distinct from the shareholders. They also have a continuous existence independent of their specific members. Think of a football team like the 6-time Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers. The first of those 6 wins came in January of 1975. The most recent was in February 2009. That's almost 35 years later. Not a single player was on both teams, and most of the players on the 2009 team hadn't even been born in 1975. But they are still the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's the same for Apple Incorporated. Apple was incorporated on January 3rd, 1977. Since then, Apple has turned over thousands of employees and owners. It's still Apple, though. Apple is still Apple, regardless of who owns it. It has a continuous existence independent of its specific owners. Another way to structure a company is a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is a one-person business that hasn't incorporated. It's the simplest form of business organization imaginable. For example, suppose that you're a high school music teacher who makes a few $1,000s a year giving piano lessons on the side. You aren't going to give up your day job and don't expect to make a lot of money on the side, so you've never paid much attention to incorporating. Students show up, you teach them, they pay you. You're a sole proprietor. Sole proprietorships and corporations have their differences, and the biggest of those is limited liability. Corporations have limited liability, and sole proprietorships don't. This can mean a lot if the business goes bad. If your friend Carl borrows money to buy a piano for his music lessons and later can't pay his debt, then the lender can sue for just about all of Carl's assets up to the amount of the debt. If instead Carl starts Carl's Music Shop, Incorporated, then if he can't pay his debt, then the most he can lose is the company. The lender can't come after his car and savings. The corporation Carl founded has limited liability. The idea behind limited liability is that starting a business is plenty risky as it is. About a third of new businesses fail in the first 2 years, and about half of new businesses fail in their first 5 years. Many people who are willing to risk their entire investment in a new business are not willing to risk everything they own. That's just too dangerous for most people. Limited liability seems strange to some people, but it isn't a new idea. Some experts say that shipping merchants sought and obtained limited liability as early as 2,000 years BC. Another reason to think of corporations as a bag of goodies is that it's easier to realize that a bag of goodies is nothing more than a bag of goodies. We don't want to confuse the managers who control the goodies with the goodies themselves. Some political figures like to attack corporations, and some others think they're just dandy. Both groups are misguided. Corporations do make the perfect boogeyman, though. Deborah Small of the University of Pennsylvania and George Lowenstein of Carnegie Mellon University have run experiments to learn if people react differently to what they call identifiable victims compared to statistical victims. Identifiable victims are specific, concrete people and things, like a person in a photograph or a named person. Statistical victims are faceless, nameless people and things. You can probably guess what they find. They show that people are more sympathetic to identifiable victims than they are to statistical victims. Legend has it that Alfred Hitchcock, perhaps the greatest maker of scary movies ever, used to say, "Never show them the monster." Hitchcock knew that the unknown is always scarier. Politicians and commentators can claim that faceless corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes or that they make too much profit. It all strikes me as silly. They're confusing the shareholders who own the corporation with the corporation itself. As an investor, of course, you get to decide where to invest your money. You might not approve of certain activities and refuse to support them. Maybe you think gambling is wrong, or you don't want any part of an aerospace company that builds defense weaponry. That's perfectly fine. It's your money. I said earlier that I like to think of corporations as just a bag of goodies. I never want to confuse the managers who control the goodies with the goodies themselves. Bernie Madoff founded and headed Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC. Madoff pleaded guilty to defrauding thousands of investors to the tune of billions of dollars. He was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law, which is 150 years imprisonment. I'm not here to quibble about whether Madoff is a bad guy or a good guy who just made mistakes. No, my point is that Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC, isn't to blame. There's no point in getting mad at it. The telephones, computers, and desks that comprise the corporation were just goodies like telephones, computers, and desks. It's true that at least one employee and owner of the company put those assets to bad use, but it isn't going to do any good to put the telephone in prison, is it? Part of the confusion traces to the way we use language. We use shorthand all the time. We don't say, the people who own Ferrari hire people who make exotic cars. We just say, Ferrari makes exotic cars. Most of the time, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes, though, it can lead to bad decisions and bad policy. For example, if a politician says that he wants to make corporations pay their fair share, then some people are going to like that, and some people won't. And that's fine. What's not fine is if people think that if we tax corporations more, then we can tax people less. Life doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. If the government taxes Multimower an extra $1,000, then you and Carl wouldn't have been able to receive those funds as a dividend. Maybe that's what people want, and maybe it's not. The point is that making a corporation pay more taxes is just another way of making people pay more taxes. The next time you read a business article or watch the financial news, see if you can find examples of the concepts we learned today. You're sure to hear about this or that company's stock trading up or down a few dollars per share, and you might hear somebody confusing a corporation with the people who manage them. You might hear about a stock issue. Individual companies don't issue new securities that often, so when they do, it tends to make the news. See if your new knowledge of securities doesn't start to make the business of trading them feel a little more understandable. In this lecture, we learned about fundamental securities, stocks, and bonds. In our next lecture, we'll learn some of the basics of stock markets, the institutions that let people like us buy and sell those securities. I have good news for you. Although these markets are high-tech and are becoming more sophisticated every year, the basics are a lot like markets we encounter every day, such as markets for groceries or cars. That means that you have the main idea already. We can dive into the details with confidence.